The aura of invincibility that surrounded a number of leaders around the world has been undermined. And elections in a number of countries that previously were decided before voters even went to the polls now really matter and are much less predictable. So just as 1989 and 1991 were transformative years in recent history, it is quite possible that 2011 will go down in history as a transformative year too.
This is really the gold standard when it comes to thinking about and having a benchmark by which we can look at the state of freedom in the world, and it performs just an invaluable function.
The authoritarian leaders of the world do not appear to be the wave of the future. They seem to be in retreat, on the defensive, facing crises.
As to which way the world is going, I think the answer is obviously going to be, yes, this was a 1989 moment, but which way it goes is yet to be determined. Where are we now? Well, clearly it seems to me there's more of a balance than I would like to see in the international system between autocracies and democracies. But I think the democracies are still dominant, but it depends what they do. And I think that's where I feel like sometimes it's dangerous to look back on these develops and say, well, it's what the people do, it's, you know, it's evolution, or they made a mistake. But and all these things are true. There are independent forces that are at work. But what the great powers do, and I guess I would say particularly in this instance what the United States does, can be a critical tipping point.
And this will be, I think, an architectural year for freedom on the internet or lack thereof. There are a series of important deliberations that are underway, some within the UN system, some in other intergovernmental forums. There are alignments of countries that are taking shape, those that are committing firmly to ensuring that the basic rights to freedom of expression, freedom of association, that are enshrined in the Universal Declaration, to make sure that those are honored online as they are offline, and those that are seizing on these technologies as new opportunities and vehicles for repression and to deny these rights. And so I think the decisions made, the alignments that form, really right now and over the next year or two, can really determine to what degree, these tools are available to activists in some of the most repressive countries, who may have opportunities to take advantage of them, even as they are incomplete tools, and we saw that they, have this tremendous potential, but they also, don't replace by any means, the kind of hard work of organizing and training and leadership development that, really undergirded some of, the last few decades' most successful revolutions.
Tunisia is probably the most important gain for freedom in the past decade, and maybe even in the past 2 decades.
Tunisia, in many ways, has set a bar in terms of the possible.
These semi-authoritarian regimes are demonstrating that the mechanisms they've used to rule for so long are no longer impervious to either internal or external forces. The reality is that we're in for a process that's going to take a good decade or more by which these forces are going to work these things out. And it's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. The tree trunk is still there, even if the tree has fallen down.
A session like this in January 1990 would have been more optimistic than this session here. And there's one huge difference, and that is basically everybody, I think, certainly everybody in the democratic world and everybody in Eastern Europe, pretty much all the key players, wanted these societies to succeed. I think today in the Middle East, you've got a great many forces of bad faith who are rooting for failure.
The stakes for a country like Bahrain or Syria are very high. It's hard for the regime in both countries to see how it survives a transition to democracy. It's a zero-sum game for them. I don't think that Islam is the problem or the solution. I think the solution is legal and institutional.
You know, there was a real watershed moment sort of last spring, somewhere between the beginning of Tahrir Square and the start of the NATO operation in Libya, where the administration sort of found its footing as a force, at least in some of the crucial breaking events of the day. But it's still tentative. And I think that's what what I think is our obligation is to and we agree on this, is to kind of force that to come to fruition. And that if there's no follow through on a process of domestic accountability that and reform that exists on paper and has been laid out in a terrific report by international jurist Sharif Bassiouni. If there's no follow through in that, the United States has to put its money and its arms where its mouth is, and I think stand behind the rhetoric that it has used over the last year.
However, in the near term, with things generally going in a pretty good direction, we are too reticent as a government to use the lever that we have. And fortunately, Congress, which has been very responsible on this issue, has given the administration now an opportunity, because as you may or may not know, there is a certification requirement now for dispersing continued aid to Egypt, including the Egyptian military. I believe the administration cannot certify, both as a technical matter, but also certainly as a political matter, cannot certify as long as Egypt is still, holding the NGO's equipment and arresting their people, bringing them in for interrogation. Burma's opening is clearly part of a desire to get closer to the United States and get themselves out from under the thumb of the Chinese. And fortunately, thanks to good U.S. policy, the price of admission is they have to start liberalizing. China would be tremendously advantaged as a potential global power of real influence if it underwent significant changes in its domestic political orientation.
Same reasons we ultimately, the administration ultimately, had to side with the protesters in Egypt, should, need to determine our policy, now on Bahrain. And that if there's no follow through on a process of domestic accountability that and reform that exists on paper and has been laid out in a terrific report by international jurist Sharif Bassiouni, if that doesn't, but seems to be stagnating. If there's no follow through in that, the United States has to put its money and its arms where its mouth is, and I think stand behind the rhetoric that it has used over the last year.
And so I'm not a great believer that advocacy of regime change is going to produce regime change. I think, in fact, it could be quite the opposite in the case of Iran, and that we are not, and that the path towards some sort of liberalization of the political system will come through U.S.-Iranian reconciliation and not against it. And I'm sure there are those here in this audience that disagree with that, but I've thought long and hard about this, and I don't think that that advocating the downfall of the regime is going to bring what we want, quite the opposite.
Over the last year, and here in the United States, I think at some of the crucial moments, leadership, was shown sometimes a little bit late, but I think by and large, the administration was able to be responsive to the, if not encouraging on the leading edge, at least responsive and not a force of progress rather than reaction. But I think we also saw some of the limits of U.S. influence.
Being a long-term dictator and ally of the United States is not a safe business. I mean, ultimately, we will betray you whether we think we're going to or not.
Ukraine declined over the past 2 years, that is to say the 2 years of Viktor Yanukovych's leadership, more precipitously than any other major country in the world.
I think we should be publicly criticizing Turkey. You can have we've proved, if one thing we've proved, you can have a relationship with a country, you can do business with a country, and still criticize what he's doing. So the question is, what do you do when one of these countries starts backsliding in the way that Hungary has? And I think the answer is you start holding them to the standards that you want to hold everybody to. Now, I don't know whether your point is that because they let them in with these flaws, or with some countries in with these flaws, therefore they don't have any standing. But I remember, I mean, the EU began the ostracizing of Austria, for instance, when they voted for Haidar, when there was this vote for Haidar, and he hadn't even, I mean, Austria hadn't even moved necessarily in that bad a direction. The EU is capable of sending a strong signal to members. Now, maybe at this particular moment with the Eurozone crisis, it's maybe not the ideal moment to try to do that, but I think that both NATO and the EU are falling short in terms of what they ought to be doing in Hungary.